Hey everyone, welcome back to the Channel Iowa Yieldcast. I am your host, Matt Nelson, and I'm happy to be joined today by Kati Price. Kati is one of our crop protection TDRs. She covers the eastern side of the state. And as you can see, she wants to talk to us about spraying post herbicides in hot weather. So, Kati, I'm going to let you go ahead and introduce yourself, and we'll get this started.
Hey everybody, hope your season's going well so far. So my name is Kati Price. I am the crop protection tech development rep for Eastern Iowa. So I do research trials in all herbicides, fungicides, insecticides, in our new short corn systems, as well, and just any new technology that's about 4 years away from the market and currently on the market.
Very nice. And have you been staying cool? I know you've probably got a lot of plot spraying to do and have been doing, so I'm sure you've been enjoying this warm weather.
Yeah, no, it's all about starting early in the morning to get mixing and prep work done. It has been a little hot, and the next couple of days are going to be very hot as we try to beat the June 20th cutoff date to get our extended max out on our acres and small plots.
Yeah, that's a starting in the morning. That's a good strategy even for commercial applicators, I think, this time of year. So I think that's a good way to get this started. Why don't you dive into kind of I think you wanted to kind of cover some biology of plants and what happens during this weather, then also give some tips for applying when you've got a 10-day forecast that looks like ours does. Very, very hot, very sunny.
Yeah, yeah. So just kind of wanting to briefly talk about how hot weather does change the plant. What happens in this case is, especially when we have back-to-back hot and sunny weather like we do in the forecast
Mhm.
starting a couple of days ago and for the next 10 days, is that the cuticle layer on your leaves um, it increases with thickness, right? So what it's doing is it's responding to the high temperatures, so you get low moisture conditions, and so the plant is trying to protect itself from reducing water loss. And this is something you commonly see like in corn at 85 to 90 degrees, but your weeds are also doing the same.
Mhm.
And so you get this thicker, waxy layer on your weeds. And what that does is it makes it even harder for us to get the herbicides into the plant. And also, as soon as we get to certain temperatures, growth slows and we don't get active growing on in the weeds, which means we're not getting our translocation and our uptake into the plant. So sometimes we see reduced efficacy. Um,
Yeah. Is that now? Let me ask you: if anyone's ever read a herbicide label, they've probably seen spray while weeds are actively growing on it. If it's a post prompt, is that why that's on those labels?
yeah, that's exactly why it's on those labels, is
Hmm.
because it's that, and also sometimes we get to cover crops and they've already headed out and they've quit
Sure.
growing for this season. So things like that make it extremely difficult. If the plant's not growing, those herbicides aren't moving through the plant. And that's why you'll see that on a lot of those labels.
Absolutely. Okay. So we've kind of talked about um, you know what happens with those plants when it's been hot. The weather's going to stay hot, Kati. So what do we do? How do we get better control of these weeds when we do go spray?
Right. So there's a couple different things. The first thing is spraying earlier in the morning. You get better weed controlled efficacy. However, I'm realistic on the fact that we have a lot of acres to be spraying
Hmm.
in the next week or so, especially for the folks who are trying to get acres in before the cutoff date, right? So we're not
Right.
always going to be able to do that. That's not always an option. So the best way for us to counter it, and the most effective way at this point, is to use adjuvants. So looking at MSO. MSO is our best option for penetrating into leaf surface. This is followed by crop oil and then non-ionic surfactant NIS, which also helps us to get through that waxy cuticle and into the plant. There are pros and cons for every single one of these. We'll talk a little bit that in a second. But first things first, always look at the label, because the label for whatever products you're going to be spraying is the best recommendation that you're going to get. Um, if one of your labels tells you not to use MSO, say you got a tank mix going on and one says don't use MSO, you can only use crop oil, then that's the highest you can use. So that's just something to watch out when you're using tank mixes. Um, and a lot of products will have additional information in the label. So I really, if you're going to start using adjuvants, double check it, because If you use the wrong adjuvant or too high of a rate, we're going to start seeing phyto and crop injury. Or if we use the wrong end of it and don't use the right one, then we don't see the increased efficacy that we wanted to in the first place.
Absolutely. That makes perfect sense. And I know one thing that when I get on as an agronomist, when I get called to go out and look at crop injury, Katie, it's usually due to several very oily herbicides being used in combination with an oil adjuvant. You add that, you spray that on a hot day, it's not uncommon that you'll see some crop response.
Exactly. And so a lot of this is a balancing act. Is you want the weed efficacy, you want to kill your weeds, but you also want to protect your crop. So it's a balancing act on using the right adjuvant. Which kind of leads me into my next thing, because we are walking that line of crop injury while not sacrificing weed control. And to be honest with you, I'm a person I will take a little bit of crop injury as long as that weed is killed, especially water hemp, because that water hemp is going to reduce my yield and it's going to cause issues at harvest. So I always am like, well, let's do a little bit of that. And like I said, you want to look at labels and different options there, but we have a few of our products that I've threw up on this slide was, like such as Diflex, there's different rates. NIS is 0.25% volume to volume, while crop oil and MSO is 1% volume to volume. The other thing is, as you go from NIS, you're going to expect the least amount of phyto, the least amount of crop injury. Crop oil is probably your medium. And by the time you hit MSO, you're most likely to get the largest amount of crop injury with the weather that we're expecting. So like I said, at this point, you might want to, if you're going to be spraying in the heat in the middle part of the day, I would try to go with a crop oil or an NIS over an MSO. Because we're going to see a lot more crop injury for that. And on the slide, you can see there's also recommendations for Diflex Duo and Lotus as well. Lotus is one where we talk about you want to use MSO, or you can use a high surfactant oil concentrate, but you don't use crop oil or NIS. Again, this is something you're going to find on the label, and I want you to make sure you're double checking that before you go ahead and do that.
And also, that's a good call out. The label is ultimately the final resource.
Right. And I will admit, sometimes the labels get confusing and a little bit crazy. So this is where you call your technical agronomist, you call your crop protection field sales rep. If they don't know the answer, they're going to call me and I will help you guys get that figured out. But also just kind of be aware over the next 10 days when you're out there spraying, you're most likely going to see a little bit of crop injury, but that we should see everything grow out of it.
For sure. And I do like your last call out, for those extended max applications, making sure you're using a DRA and a VRA. And also I would echo checking the label as combo products have started to come out with maybe a DRA, your drift reducing adjuvant, and your VRA, your volatility reducing agent, kind of both in the same jug. It's possible you might also have an NIS or something else in that container. So it's important to make sure you know what's in that product before you maybe, you don't want to add additional COC and double up the amount of adjuvant that you're putting in. So again, it all goes back to, checking that tank mix tool on the website. You can find that at extendedmaxapplicationrequirements.com. And then, like you said, Katie, ultimately checking the label. Yeah,
no, and that is a great call out, especially with a lot of these combined DRA, VRA. There's a lot on the market right now, and some of them are coming up that I didn't even know had an NIS already mixed in there too. So that's a fantastic call out just to double check and paying attention to those labels.
Very good, Katie. Thank you for hopping on. This is excellent information. This is certainly pertinent to the way the 10-day looks, with highs, I think, early next week, it looks like, in the upper 90s. So any parting shots before we let you go from this episode?
No, I think my last piece of advice is just, if you get into a situation where you've got a question, call your technical agronomist, call your crop protection FSR. We're here to help. We want to see successful weed control and spraying over the next week, even in this heat. And so hopefully everybody's safe and has a good time out there.
10-4. Well, thank you, Katie, and everyone, thank you for watching.